It started with a routine hospital intake in Beckley, West Virginia. A child was sick, underweight, dehydrated, and without any official records. No name in the system, no medical history. The mother couldn't answer basic questions. She seemed calm. Too calm. Staff flagged the case, and within 72 hours, authorities uncovered something they couldn't explain. A secluded home, 3 undocumented children, and a family structure that didn't legally exist. There was no school attendance, no birth certificates, no trace of a mother's identity beyond a single last name. The man listed as next of kin, respected, known, but nothing checked out. As interviews began and records were pulled, it became clear. This wasn't neglect. This was orchestration. And someone had gone to great lengths, for years, to keep it buried. What they found next would shake an entire county. The nurses at Beckley Regional had seen a lot. Mountain accidents, mining injuries, babies born in motel bathrooms, but the child brought in on a rainy Thursday morning didn't fit any pattern. He was 6 months old, visibly underweight, and struggling to breathe. His skin was pale. His limbs didn't flinch when he was touched, and the woman who carried him in said almost nothing. "His name?" one nurse asked. The woman hesitated. "Micah." No last name, no documentation, no insurance card, no prior records in the system. She didn't seem panicked, but she wasn't calm either. Just still, distant. Like she'd rehearsed this moment, but still wasn't ready for it. "Your name?" another nurse asked gently. "Raina Hollowell." That was all they got. Standard protocol in a case like this meant running basic labs and initiating emergency care. But within minutes, things began to unravel. The child's veins were difficult to access. An attending physician quietly requested social services. A form was filled. A preliminary DNA test was ordered under medical necessity to determine immediate compatibility in case of transfusion. Raina signed it without question. What came back 3 hours later wasn't a match. It was a mirror. The man listed as emergency contact, Lester Hollowell, wasn't the grandfather, as staff had assumed. He was something else entirely. But even that assumption didn't hold long. Because according to the test results, Raina and Lester shared more than just the same surname. Word spread quickly through the pediatric unit. Not with alarm, but with a kind of grim quiet. Something about the way Raina stared blankly at the child. Something about her silence. The way she flinched when an orderly raised his voice at a dropped clipboard. By the time Child Protective Services arrived, 2 more facts had emerged. This wasn't Raina's first child. There were 3 children total, all reportedly living on a private property outside Beckley. None of them had birth certificates. None had ever been enrolled in school or vaccinated. And none had ever been seen by a doctor. Raina didn't fight the process. She handed over her child without a scene. When asked if anyone else was at the home, she gave a nod. When asked who the father was, she didn't speak. She just stared at the wall. The sheriff's office was notified. CPS flagged it as a priority case and requested an in-person welfare check at the Hollowell residence. A judge approved the order within hours. Back at the hospital, Micah was stabilized and moved to the pediatric observation unit. The Hollowell property sat at the edge of Beckley's last paved road, a winding stretch of gravel and overgrowth that hadn't seen county maintenance in years. The house wasn't falling apart, but it looked forgotten. A gray-blue structure with uneven shutters, a lopsided porch, and no mailbox. A worn sign near the fence read, "Private Land. Do not enter." No one ever did. Until now. 2 unmarked cars pulled up just before sunset. A CPS officer, a deputy, and a child advocate stepped out. The gate creaked open on its own, already unlatched. The walk up to the front door was silent. No barking dog, no voices inside. Just the sound of wind moving through tall grass. Lester Hollowell opened the door before they knocked. He looked exactly like his reputation suggested. Pressed flannel shirt, jeans, calm eyes, slow voice. He greeted them with polite confusion. "What's all this about?" The CPS officer explained the emergency order. Lester nodded as if expecting it. "You'll find everything's fine here," he said, stepping aside. "The kids are in the back. I homeschool them myself. Raised 'em quiet." Inside, the air felt heavy. Not dirty. Just still. The living room was sparse, but clean. A stack of Bibles on one table, school books on another. No television, no photos, no baby toys, despite 3 children living there. A thin curtain blocked the back hallway. When one of the officers stepped forward, Lester didn't stop him. "Go ahead. They're just playing." Behind the curtain, they found 2 children. The oldest, a boy around 10, and a younger girl. None of them spoke. The CPS worker crouched down and asked their names. The children looked to Lester. He answered for them. "That's Eden and Levi." "Any documentation?" the advocate asked. Lester scratched his beard. "We never did papers. They're mine and Raina's. We don't go through the system. Too much government in people's homes these days." "Is she your wife?" the deputy asked quietly. Lester chuckled. "Number Raina's my girl. We take care of each other. It's complicated, I guess." There was no license on file, no birth certificates, no homeschool registration, no doctor visits, no social security records. Nothing. "I inherited this place from my daddy," Lester added. "We don't bother nobody, and we expect the same." The CPS agent stepped into the hallway. On the walls were hand-drawn charts, alphabets, multiplication tables, Bible verses. There were no photos of birthdays, no signs of friends, no artwork on the fridge. And yet, nothing seemed illegal. Not immediately. But it felt wrong. The deputy radioed in a request for further records. The CPS worker started paperwork to take the children in for medical review. Lester didn't argue. He just said, "We've been doing fine for years. Don't see why that has to change now." As the cars pulled away, Lester stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't crying. He was smiling. And no one could figure out why. 2 days after the welfare check, a caseworker assigned to review Raina Hollowell's background requested archived files from the county's education liaison. Most families in rural Beckley had gaps in paperwork. Late registrations, incomplete immunization records, missing report cards. But Raina's file didn't just have gaps. It had an end. Her name appeared on a school roster at an elementary until 5th grade. After that, nothing. No transfer forms, no homeschool affidavit, no record of continuation. It was as if, at age 11, she simply disappeared from the system. But tucked in the district's 2009 archived referral logs was a single flagged entry. Raina Hollowell, suspected neglect, emotional abuse, filed by teacher's aide, source anonymous. The date matched the final semester she attended school. The complaint had been stamped, closed, home cleared, H. McCree. The caseworker paused. Harold McCree. The name triggered a flicker of recognition. He wasn't just a veteran in the local CPS network. He had been a close colleague of Eula Hollowell, Lester's mother. Eula had retired 5 years earlier, but during her tenure, she'd supervised or mentored nearly every intake officer in the region, including McCree. The archived report, though thin, gave enough to raise new alarms. The note from the teacher's aide had referenced Raina coming to school withdrawn, visibly distressed, and with unusual knowledge about adult relationships. But during McCree's single documented visit to the Hollowell property, he noted no signs of neglect, citing a clean home, engaged father figure, and well-supplied learning materials. The report had been closed the same day. But now, with a fresh investigation underway, the file wasn't just outdated. It was evidence. Evidence that the signs had been there all along. That someone, at some point, saw something and tried to say something. And that the system, as so often happens, quietly erased the red flag. When approached about the report, McCree told his supervisor he barely remembered the visit. He said he'd worked dozens of cases that year and had no personal relationship with the Hollowells. But emails from the agency's internal directory told a different story. Holiday photos, retirement send-offs, and a training seminar from 2011 all showed McCree and Eula side by side. Not just colleagues, but friends. Further digging revealed that the Hollowell family was considered trusted in county circles. Lester's father had once led a men's ministry group. Eula had earned multiple commendations during her time with the Child Welfare Department. Their name wasn't just familiar. It was respected. Untouchable. The news broke quietly. A short article buried beneath regional weather alerts and high school football scores, just a line about authorities looking into custodial irregularities tied to a rural residence in Beckley. For most people, it was a headline easily ignored. But not for Tyra Blakes. She was on her lunch break at the nursing home when she saw the article on her phone. The description of the property. The mention of a mother named Raina. The reference to the Hollowell name. It had been nearly 18 years since she last saw Raina Hollowell. Back then, Tyra was 13, eager for extra money, and flattered when Miss Eula down the road offered her weekend babysitting work for a sweet little girl named Raina. It was only supposed to be a few hours each Saturday, but it turned into something else. She never told anyone why she stopped going. That weekend, Tyra sat alone in her car after her shift, the article still glowing on her screen. Her stomach twisted. The memories came back slow, in pieces. The way Lester always insisted she sit near him when Raina fell asleep. The comments he'd make about how mature she was for her age. How he'd touch her shoulder, her hair, her back. Just long enough to make it feel wrong, but never long enough to scream. The night he asked if she'd ever thought about being a second mother figure to Raina was the last night she stepped foot in that house. Back then, she'd told herself it was nothing. That maybe she was overreacting. Her own mother didn't press when she suddenly quit the job. And Eula, when asked about it at church, just smiled and said, Tyra wasn't ready for the responsibility. Now, sitting in her car, Tyra realized that whatever she had run from all those years ago, Raina had been left behind in it. The next morning, she made the call. It took 3 tries before she could speak. She asked for the lead caseworker and gave her name. When asked what her involvement was, she paused, then said, I used to babysit the girl. Raina. Tyra's account was detailed. Names, dates, behavior patterns, descriptions of the Hollowell home, unchanged even now. She described Lester's slow, practiced method of making her feel seen, then cornered. How he shifted the mood from warmth to something darker without ever crossing a line publicly. She remembered the locked room in the back, the way Eula would always leave just before Lester did. Most critically, she remembered Raina. Silent, obedient, too cautious for a child. She never asked to play, never laughed. It was like she was already someone's wife, Tyra said. The caseworker typed everything. Tyra's testimony aligned with Raina's reported timeline almost exactly. It provided third-party verification of Lester's grooming behavior and patterns of psychological control. It confirmed that Raina had been isolated from the outside world long before the birth of her first child. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It had been a slow construction, brick by brick, over years. Tyra hadn't just seen it. She had almost been part of it. By coming forward, she became something else entirely. The voice from outside the fence. The witness no one could discredit. The proof that Lester's actions weren't confined to a single person. They were a pattern, sharpened with time, and executed with precision. Tyra left the interview shaken but lighter. She had carried that silence for nearly 2 decades. Now, her words had weight, and they had finally been heard. Until now, no one had mentioned a woman named Paulette. Not in the interviews, not in the files, not even in the cautious conversations whispered around the Hollowell case. But while reviewing the earliest property reports on the Hollowell residence, an officer noted a casual remark from a neighbor. Didn't he used to have a wife? Her name was listed in a 2001 tax record, Paulette R. Hollowell. No occupation, no forwarding address, just a name. No divorce filing, no record of death. Nothing official to say she ever stopped living there. And yet, by every other record, she simply vanished when Raina was around 6 years old. The officer followed up with the neighbor who'd made the comment, a retired postmaster named Ms. Loretta Bryce. She remembered Paulette. She was real quiet, pretty thing, always kept to herself, but she'd wave when she saw you. Then one day she just stopped coming out. Lester said she ran off, took her bags and walked out one night. That's what he told the church. Ms. Bryce never believed it. She had a daughter. No mother runs off and leaves a little girl behind. A records analyst was brought in to pull any law enforcement contact tied to the Hollowell address from the past 30 years. There weren't many. One stood out. August 14th, 2003. Anonymous 911 call. The transcript was short, grainy from age, and lacked detail. A woman's voice. No name given. Her words rushed and breathless. I heard screaming. It sounded like a woman, back behind the tree line. I think something's wrong. You need to send someone. The call was routed to County Dispatch. A unit was dispatched, but notes indicated that by the time officers arrived, the property was quiet. Lester answered the door and said his daughter had night terrors. Officers noted no visual disturbance and left the scene. No report was filed, no follow-up. But the date? August 14th, just 2 weeks before Raina was withdrawn from school for what Lester described at the time as family restructuring. Digging deeper, the analyst searched DMV records. Paulette never renewed her license. Her Social Security number had no activity after 2003. No tax filings, no employment, no medical bills, nothing. Her life stopped. It was as if she'd been erased. The team began treating it as a cold case. Back at the shelter, Raina still hadn't spoken about her mother, but when a counselor gently mentioned the name Paulette, Raina froze. Her fingers tightened around the blanket in her lap. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The next day, a search warrant was issued for the Hollowell property. Not for child endangerment this time, but for suspected foul play in the disappearance of Paulette Hollowell. This time, they brought dogs. They combed the tree line behind the house, dense with brush, uneven terrain, and patches of disturbed earth that didn't quite match the rest of the landscape. One area in particular, behind an old shed, near the edge of the property line, drew repeated canine alerts. It was there they found shallow remnants of cloth, tattered fabric buried beneath the soil. Bone fragments followed, partial remains. The coroner would need days to confirm, but no one doubted what they had found. Word reached the department quietly. The case was now officially reclassified as a homicide. As for Eula Hollowell, Lester's mother, it didn't take long for her name to surface in phone records. She had been present at the house the night of the 911 call. A grocery delivery invoice listed her credit card on file. Surveillance from a gas station showed her car traveling toward Lester's home that same afternoon. Paulette never ran. She was removed. And the silence that had protected Lester's secret for nearly 2 decades was finally cracking. One whisper, one bone, one name at a time. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that invites peace, the kind that waits for something heavy. A single recorder sat on the table. Across from it, Raina Hollowell rested her hands in her lap. She didn't look at the caseworker, or the counselor, or the notepad being scribbled on across the room. Her eyes stayed fixed on the far wall, where nothing was hanging. It had taken weeks to get her here. The protective custody unit where she and her children were placed had done little to soften her silence. She was cooperative, but withdrawn. She bathed and fed the kids. She answered questions with yes or no. But she never told her story, until now. The caseworker leaned forward. "Take your time. You can start wherever you want." Raina exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath. Then she began. "I stopped going to school when I was 11. He said I didn't need it. Said the world out there would ruin me. Said I'd be safer learning at home, from him." Her voice was low but steady. Each word pulled from a place that hadn't been opened in years. "When my mom was still alive, I remember her crying a lot. She used to pack little bags for me. I think she was trying to leave. But then, one night, she just stopped being there. No goodbye. No nothing. After that, he said I had to grow up. Said I was the only one he could trust." Raina's hands trembled slightly. "He started giving me rules, what to wear, where I could go, how to talk to people. Eventually, I wasn't allowed to leave the property at all. He told me it was dangerous, that people out there would try to take me away and destroy what we had." She looked down at her lap. "I believed him, for a long time." The first pregnancy came when she was barely a teenager. She didn't understand what was happening to her body. There were no appointments, no doctors, just Lester, telling her it was normal, telling her it was a blessing, that their family was growing. Raina's second child came 3 years later. Then another. All delivered at home. All undocumented. All kept away from the world. When asked why she never ran, she said, "Where was I supposed to go? I didn't know anyone. I didn't even know what I was allowed to think. Everything I knew was what he told me." It wasn't until her youngest child grew sick that she broke. The symptoms scared her. Lester told her it would pass. Told her not to take the baby to a hospital. But something inside her, something buried, but still alive, pushed back. When the caseworker finally spoke, her voice cracked. "Raina, what do you want us to do?" Raina's answer was quiet, but firm. "Don't let him lie anymore." In that moment, the veil broke. Not just around Raina, but around the myth Lester had built. A lie dressed as protection, control disguised as love, and a childhood that was never hers to begin with. And now, at last, she had taken something back. Her voice. They waited until sunrise. A convoy of marked vehicles and plainclothes units rolled down the gravel road leading to the Hollowell residence. No sirens, no knock. Just a warrant and a team who already knew what they were walking into. Lester Hollowell opened the door like he'd been expecting them. He didn't run. He didn't protest. He just said, "You're making a mistake." The cuffs clicked in silence, but the collapse didn't end with him. That same afternoon, Eula Hollowell was escorted from her small white home on the south end of town. No handcuffs, not yet. But the questions were sharp, and the suspicion was official. Her decades-long career in child services had been clean on paper, but suddenly, every case she'd touched was being pulled for review. Her response was short. "This is political." "My son is a good man." Investigators didn't agree. Records showed she had been on Lester's property the night of Paulette's disappearance. She had made contact with Harold McCree twice in the week following the 911 call. One of those conversations lasted over 40 minutes. No transcript, no report filed. Harold McCree was suspended from Child Protective Services pending investigation. At the temporary shelter, Raina and her children were relocated under a sealed emergency protection directive. Their whereabouts were undisclosed, even to most within the agency. They needed space, not just for safety, but for survival. Behind the scenes, state-level investigators were brought in. The Hollowell case had exposed cracks not just in one household, but in the institutions around it. Law enforcement, child protection, the very community fabric. It wasn't just what Lester had done. It was what everyone else hadn't. The neighbor who stayed quiet. The teacher whose concerns were dismissed. The social worker who filed a single visit report and moved on. The grandmother who pulled strings instead of pulling her granddaughter to safety. One by one, the blindfolds were falling off. The house at the edge of Beckley, once hidden behind tall grass and silence, was now a symbol of what happens when control looks like care, when tradition hides abuse, when a whole town decides not to ask questions. The courtroom was packed by the time the bailiff called the session to order. Lester Hollowell entered wearing a county-issued suit and a flat expression. His hands were cuffed, his posture relaxed. Even now, he didn't seem afraid. He pled not guilty to all charges: aggravated abuse, custodial interference, falsification of records, and multiple counts tied to unlawful paternity and concealment. The judge didn't flinch. The jury didn't blink. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA tests showed with full certainty that Lester fathered all three of Raina's children. Hospital documentation confirmed that none of them had medical histories until the emergency intake. School records were non-existent. Tyra Blake's testimony, delivered with clarity and trembling hands, confirmed Lester's years-long pattern of manipulation. But it was Raina's voice that settled everything. She took the stand with her palms open on her lap, just as she had in the interview weeks before. Her voice didn't shake this time. She spoke about the slow isolation, about being told she was different, chosen, about the rules, what to wear, what to say, how to smile. She described how she was made to believe love meant obedience, how, as a child, she was praised for silence, how her first labor happened with a washcloth between her teeth to keep from screaming. The courtroom didn't move. When asked why she never ran sooner, Raina simply said, "I didn't know I could." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts. At sentencing, the judge called Lester's actions a calculated dismantling of another human being's identity. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. When asked if he had anything to say, Lester looked at Raina and muttered, "You were always my responsibility." She didn't respond. Raina was granted full guardianship of her children. For the first time, they were issued birth certificates. Medical records were opened. School enrollments were processed. Each child was given a last name that did not belong to Lester. They would carry her name now. The healing was slow and far from complete, but it had begun. Raina declined media interviews. She didn't want a platform. She wanted space. She wanted her children to have a life where no one whispered about where they came from. A life where their existence wasn't the aftermath of someone else's darkness. Before leaving the courthouse for the last time, she walked past the holding cells, not to see Lester, but to see her reflection in the glass. Not as a victim, but as someone who had survived what others never even knew existed. She wasn't the same girl who once thought silence was safety. She was a mother. She was a witness. She was proof. And though she walked away with no fanfare, no applause, and no illusion that healing would be easy, she walked away free. Unfortunately, Eula also walked away free. We still wonder how that happened.